What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Mork Unfiltered. This is one of my solo episodes today, so if you were expecting me with a guest and you got other things to do, it's all good, man. It's as I said, one of the things that we're going to be doing on this show is every other episode I'm going to be doing a solo episode, unless I found out that you guys absolutely hate listening to me and you find that what I'm saying is not relevant to you and not useful, and not helpful, or not entertaining, or all of the above. And you decide that you just want guests, in which case, hey, guess what? We'll go back to guests. As you can tell, I'm kind of this unusual backdrop today. I'm actually in Singapore, on the other end of the planet, at least from where I live. I live in Miami, as some of you guys might know. I flew out here because it's the 25th anniversary of the INSEAD Singapore campus. INSEAD, as some of you may or may not know, one of the world's top 5 business schools. My father and I were fortunate enough to go to that school. So this weekend was the 25th year anniversary of the campus, which was kind of a big deal. So he decided to come out here to celebrate and invited me to tag along. And actually, it dovetails really nicely with one of the things I wanted to talk about and share with you guys today. I came out here, 24-hour flight. Man, those flights are just horrible. No matter what class you're in, it just sucks because it's just an eternally long flight. One of the things I wanted to really talk about today is the importance of experiences. I say that because, we live in a world where so many people are, especially in the US, I've been back in the US now 2 years, and I just find that so many people are fixated on getting stuff, right? It's like we're fixated on, having a bigger car, or having a bigger house, or having a second house, or having more clothes, or having nice bags, or having nice jewelry, whatever. We've been conditioned to consume so much that ultimately, one of the things that I always think about is, when you buy that new car, that new watch, or that new pair of shoes, or whatever, is that really something that brings you happiness? And as somebody who's had their shares of ups and downs, and had nice cars, and had nice houses and nice clothes, one of the things I realized, and maybe I realize this as I get older, as you get older, one of the things that you realize is the value of experiences. Just being out here with my dad for a couple of days, I knew it was a really important to him that I come out here. And spending quality time with him, just as a tourist, going to the Flower Dome, or going to the Garden Forest, or the Mandarin Bay Hotel, has been a really amazing experience. Spending that quality time with him, seeing kind of his eyes light up when we went into the Flower Dome, which is a remarkable construction. I mean, if you ever come to Singapore, you have to go. This is for me, like one of the 8 wonders of the world, right? It's there's 7, but this should be an 8th. It's really incredible. But the point is, guys, no matter where you live or what your financial conditions are, not everybody can fly to Singapore, and I totally appreciate that. But living your life where you experience as many experiences as possible and do things that are different and new for you, whether that's, going fishing, or going out of state, or traveling, or going to a ball game, or going to a movie, or whatever, going to a ballet, or doing something different. I think that's really what makes life worth living. I have an insane number of photos on Google Photos, and I find that, I'm always able to go back to those albums and revisit places that I've been, or interesting things I've done. At the end of November, I'm going to South Africa for some work with a client, and I decided, I'm going to take a couple of extra days. I'm going to go down to Cape Town, and I'm going to go to Kruger Park, and I'm going to do a safari. And again, it's for the experience of having done it. It's for the experience of having lived it. And so I think far too many of us place a lot of importance on buying stuff and acquiring material possessions, and spending money on stuff that, frankly, spend money on shit that we don't need to impress people that we don't know, often with money that we don't have, right? And when you're able to experience things, whether it's, fishing, or a nice day on a lake, or going swimming, or going out with friends and going bowling, or whatever that experience may be for you, I find that that re-energizes me. In my case, I'm lucky enough because of my work, to travel, for speaking, or for workshops, or for personal stuff. I always come back to Miami energized by these trips. I always come back energized with these experiences. And, whenever I go to a new city, like Singapore, Singapore, I lived here 40 years ago. I lived here in the 1980s. That's how old I am, right? Young at heart. And what I find is, when I travel, I immerse myself in the culture that I find myself in. I go out to eat, I go to museums, I meet people, I learn something about the history, about the place that I'm at. And whether you choose to do this, just in the United States somewhere locally, or South America somewhere, just going, to another town, or you're in Europe, you go to another country, you go to another town, or whatever, I think these experiences, that's really what living is all about. That's really what humanity is all about. When we expose ourselves to new things and we step out of our normal day to day, it makes our lives richer. It makes it worth living, right? So I wanted to share that with you guys because a couple weeks ago I was in Santo Domingo and I got to travel around the city there and go to museums and meet interesting people and again immerse myself in the culture. In Singapore it's the same. Today I'm going to go to the Buddhist Tooth Relic Temple, which is something I've never seen before, and I don't know when I'll be back next in Singapore. This is not exactly my neck of the woods and it's far. Experiencing all those things is, I think, something that brings me energy. It brings me joy. Obviously, everybody out there is different. Some of you listening to this may hate traveling. That may not be your thing. Doing new things that we don't usually do is something that gives a little bit of spice to our life. So I think, that's one thing I wanted to talk about. The other thing I wanted to share with you guys, and, if you're in your 40s or 50s, you can probably really relate to this. If you're younger, maybe less so. And if you're older, well, it really depends if your parents are really around. But when my dad initially told me he was going to come to Singapore and it was the 25th year of the campus, kind of like my eyes rolled into the back of my head and I was like, oh shit, that's such a far trip. I have so many things to do. I'm not a huge fan of leaving my son alone because, my son is lives with me and day trades all day. And, he's in a new city where he doesn't have a ton of friends. So it's not cool to kind of leave him on his own a lot. But honestly, a big reason why I came out to Singapore was, it was a big deal for my old man. It was a big deal for him to have me here with him. And I knew it would mean a lot to him. And we were able to spend some amazing quality time together. And, he's 81 years old. And so for those of you out there who have older parents, when you're in your 40s or 50s, you find yourself in this, I don't know if you guys have thought about this, or if you feel it, it's kind of a really weird, strange place to be, in your 40s or 50s. Because on the one hand, your parents are getting older. They're not as like dynamic or as youthful or as energized as they used to be. They're getting older. They're having health issues. And then on the other hand, you have kids, right? And for those of you who had kids that are late, that in your later years, like I did, you still have to take care of your kids and see them through school or college or figure out what their lives are all about. So you're kind of like the ham and the sandwich where you're navigating these two things between taking care of your older parents who need your help and taking care of your kids who also need your help, right? And that doesn't leave you a whole lot of space for yourself, which can make it difficult. Parents, what I found is, a couple of weeks ago, I was in Belgium, as some of you guys may remember, and my mom had a double pulmonary embolism, right? That's where some of the arteries in your chest get blocked. You have like a blood clot that forms. It can be very dangerous. And she had two very large ones, hence double, and it was life-threatening. And we were able to get her to the emergency room and they gave her blood thinners and they ran a bunch of scans. Fortunately, she's back home now, recovering, doing a lot of physical therapy. It's a scare. Like, every time I go back, I wonder if I'm gonna see her again. So it's not exactly a cheerful subject, but I wanted to bring it up because I think so many people listening to this are probably dealing with that. And sometimes, we're so trapped in our own world and our own thing that we forget about our parents, right? We forget that, they are not as mobile as they used to be. They're not as dynamic. They don't have as many friends anymore because maybe some of them are gone. They don't have a lot of people to turn to. We may feel a certain sense of responsibility to do something about that, to be part of their lives, and one of the things that I would urge all of you to think about, and I'm nobody to tell you how to live your life. I think every one of us has to sort that out for himself. But, I find that when I give of myself, when I give of my time, when I invest in my relationships, particularly with my parents, flying 24 hours, 25 hours, being a true tourist guide for my dad, taking him to all these places, but also seeing, the light in his eyes and the energy light up as he was experiencing these things with me. That's kind of what makes life worth living. And I think many of us are so fixated on our own lives and our own worries and our own needs and our own wants that it stresses us out. And I think we're living through an era where people are increasingly anxious about a lot of things. Whether you're anxious about, politics in the United States, definitely a good thing to be anxious about, or the state of the world, or climate change, or the economy, or AI. One of the things that I found is that by focusing on others and giving back and helping other people, I worry less about my own shit. It's like I don't worry so much about, oh, how's my business doing, or is my client going to renew, or am I going to get that speaking gig in Mexico that I wanted, or I think giving back to our parents is one of the noblest and best things that we can do. Many of us have parents that are older that are not doing real well. My mom has had a series of things one year after another. and it's really affected her mood. But one thing I can tell you is, I've tried to call her every day. In Singapore, I haven't been able to because the time difference is, 15 hours. But I can tell you, man, when I'm in Miami, I call her every day, and I really do believe that it's made a difference in her recovery. I feel that, her having somebody to talk to, hearing my voice on the other end of the phone, sharing my stories, helps her get out of her own stories. It helps her get out of her own head. With my dad this weekend as well, I think he has his own issues and his own challenges, as we all do. And I know it meant a lot to him that I came out here and spent this kind of quality time with him. And the truth, guys, is, we never know how long our parents are around. Those of you who have lost parents know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe you might have some regrets that you didn't invest enough time with them when they were around. I hope that's not the case. I certainly don't want to live with that regret. And I think that was one of the big reasons I came out to Singapore. Is I was like, well, my dad's 81. I don't know, does he have 5 years left, 10 years, 20 years? He would probably tell you, holy shit, I would hate to have 20 years left, right? But, he probably only has 5 or 10 years, right? And so you never know how long you're going to have your folks around. So I think doing things for them, whether it's a simple gesture of calling or showing interest in their lives, whether it's actually doing stuff with them, if you live nearby or live in the same city, that's one of the most that we can do for them. And so I would encourage you guys to do that. Think about it, do it more, call, be more present. Because A, you never know how long they're going to be around. And B, you'll be surprised at how it makes you feel to give back to them. Even if they don't say it, they really appreciate it. I know mine do. So that was one of the things, that I wanted to talk about today. I think the third thing that I wanted to talk about was, how do we reconnect in an era where we're increasingly connected and yet disconnected. I'm reading a book called The Anxious Generation. I don't know how many of you guys have heard this or have read about this book. It's by Jonathan Haidt. It's very interesting, very depressing, to be honest, especially if you're a parent. It talks about how, Gen X, Gen Y, our kids in many cases are growing up to be the most disconnected generation ever, right? It's like they're connected, but they're not connected. And I think that's something that should really worry us. I deal with this with my own son, who lives with me. He day trades, he decided that he didn't want to go to college. Fair enough. We each make our decisions, and his mom and I have been supportive of that. And yet I really worry because, I look around at our kids and I realize that they're all connected through social media and all this stuff. And at the same time, they're disconnected. That people don't call each other anymore. People don't get together to do things together. People ghost each other. Like this bullshit that it's like somehow normal not to respond to a text message, or it's normal not to return a phone call. It just it blows my mind. I don't understand this, right? And I know that obviously, as a Gen Xer, I'm a different generation. We grew up differently. We had different values. There were different forms of communication. When I was in school, social media and phones and texts, that stuff didn't exist, right? I really worry about that. I worry about the state of the world. And, if there's any entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs out there, I really would love somebody to come up with an app that helps us reconnect in the real world, And I know that there's apps like Meetup and other things, and you can join Facebook groups or whatever. It really concerns me to see how isolated people are becoming. It worries me to see how isolated my son is. We're connected with all these people and yet we never see them. We never call them. They never call us. A lot of my work is, coaching, senior executives and startup founders. And I find that so many of the problems that I deal with, guys, are related to communications, people's inability to have a conversation, people's inability to give feedback, people's inability to get feedback, people's inability to be assertive in their conversations when needed. We'll have a whole other episode where I'll talk about assertive communication and feedback, because so many people that I work with struggle with this. It's like we have lost the ability to fucking communicate and have a conversation. It blows my mind. It's like with my kid, I like the number of times that I call my daughter or my son that they don't answer. And yeah, I'm probably sound old fashioned, and I think most of us are facing situations like that with kids. But we even face it with our friends. I have times where I send messages to friends or I call friends and I don't get a message back or I don't get a text back. And somehow we've normalized this, like it's okay. And it's like, let me be clear that it's not okay. Right? If somebody sends you a text message, they obviously have a reason for doing that. You should answer them, even if it's like, hey, I'm busy, or I can't talk right now, or hey, look, I just got stuff going on. But we don't even answer. We don't even take the effort to answer a text message or to answer a phone call. And I think that's just sad. And when I was reading this book, The Anxious Generation, the statistics are very real in terms of, suicide rates, rates of depression, rates of anxiety. All of this goes back to 2010, right? And in 2010 to now, to later 2015, 2020, 2025, we are seeing an epidemic rise across the world, especially across the Western world, which is very interesting. We're seeing an epidemic rise in loneliness. We're seeing an epidemic rise in anxiety, in depression, in suicides. Much of which I think is, that we're all on our phones and we're texting and we're not calling and we're not communicating and we're not physically meeting with people. And I'm in a privileged position because of what I do as a speaker, as a workshop facilitator. During the week, I spend a lot of time with people. But even then, I force myself to be a member of a social club in the design district because I need to get out of the house. Otherwise, I can stay in Miami Beach very comfortably. It's very comfortable. It's very easy. And yet I force myself to go out, to go to events, to network, to meet people. Sometimes I don't really feel like it, but I always find that I come back energized from it. And I get that not everybody is like as extroverted as I am, right? There are people listening to this who are very introvert who they get anxious about being around a lot of people, or maybe you get very tired and it drains you of energy when you spend a lot of time with people. And I get that. But at the end of the day, all this technology fails to remind us that, we are human beings, we are social creatures. Hundreds of thousands of years of living in tribes and hunting and gathering and doing stuff together doesn't change the fact that we are wired for connection. And so I think, if you take away anything from this video, hopefully reach out and spend time with people. You have to invest time connecting with other people. You have to call them. You have to spend time. You have to go meet them. You have to do things together. You have to find common interests. There's a ton of lonely people in the world. And as we get older and more isolated, many of us get divorced, or we lose our partners for whatever reason, or we're getting older and we lose the will or the energy to make those connections. And I think it's one of the worst things that we can do. I think I see this so often, even with my mom. I was talking with her and she's always been a very social person. And then, as she got older, she started having health issues, so she was less able to go out, and she spent less time, being with others. And I can see how it has taken a toll on her well-being emotionally, and that emotional well-being has taken a toll on her physically. When she was sick and she was in the hospital, I flew out to Belgium. I spent a week there, and I could literally tell going to the hospital that she was recovering and was better as a function of me being in the hospital with her, as a function of me giving this energy to her. Right? Now, obviously, as all you guys know, I'm a high energy guy, so I give a lot of this energy. But I think the point that I'm making, guys, is that, don't expect people with all the things going on in their life to always be reaching out and returning phone calls and returning text messages. You got to put yourself out there. You got to be proactive. You got to come up with plans and get people together. And sometimes, some of us, we got to be the nexus for those connections, right? A couple of weeks ago, I with a friend, we organized, a mini golf putt-putt tournament, for a bunch of business school alumni on a Sunday night. And it was a great opportunity. And there were only like 8 of us. So we got together and we played mini golf, and it was a lot of fun. And I even brought my son with me, and he probably got all pissed off because he didn't win. But that's not the point, right? The point is we made an effort to get out and be social with each other and invest time in connecting in the real world. And there's nothing that replaces that connection, right? And if you want to even go farther than that, a striking amount of my business, of the work that I do, comes from these social connections. Now, obviously, I'm a coach, I'm a speaker, I'm a podcast host, so I have to be spending time with people, and it's kind of a forcing function for me, right? But what I would encourage you to do is, get up on, make an account on Meetup.com, find things that are of interest in your local community, go to church or the synagogue or wherever you go, meet with people, volunteer, do things that get you out of your house, that give you energy, that get you around other people. And I think the more you commit to doing that, the happier you'll be. I really find that I am most energized when I am traveling and around with people and doing things and going to events. And I respect that everybody's different. And for some of us, the degree to which we socialize is different because we're more introverted. But we have to make an effort. We can't forget that relationships take time. They take investments. They take effort. And it's not because people don't call us back that they don't care. It's just that they're lost in their own thing and they're focused on themselves. last but not least, I want to touch on a subject which is becoming more and more important to me in my work, and that is the definition of success. And it's interesting because, as my podcast has grown and I've been interviewing more and more interesting people, and, we're going to have some amazing people on the show coming up. I'm not going to tell you who. I will tell you one of them is the wife of a very, very famous bass player for an extremely well-known heavy metal band. So I'll let you figure out who that person is, but she's a remarkable woman, and we'll be interviewing her in the next couple of months. She'll be on the show before the end of the year. But one of the things that I am finding as I interview all these quote-unquote successful people is that, interestingly, their definition of success is not always what society's definition of success is. And so I want to leave you with that thought today as we kind of wind down the podcast episode. There is too much of a tendency in our world and in society for us to think that success is money, power, and influence. And I can only stress how wrong that is. Every single one of you out there has a different definition of success, and particularly if you're older or if you're younger, that definition changes. As you get older, the money and wealth and power piece of it becomes less important. I think, friendships and partners and family and kids is more important. Giving back and civil service is more important. And so I respect that. I'm not telling you what should be important to you or not. All I'm saying is I want you to think of success as a Greek temple, right? This is a weird metaphor, but think of success and think of your life as a Greek temple. That temple is sustained by a series of pillars, right? On average, a temple has, many different columns which support it. And so if you think of your life from the perspective of a temple like that, which is supported by pillars, the problem that I see in society, particularly in Western society, particularly in the United States, is that we have chosen, or we have been conditioned to believe that pillar is basically supported by just 2 or 3 columns, which is, wealth, power, and money, right? That is what seems to drive most people lately. And the problem with that, guys, is very simple, is what happens if one of those pillars cracks or breaks? If you lose your job tomorrow, and your identity was so wrapped up with your title as like manager, director, VP, EVP, CEO, whatever, then all of a sudden that sense of identity is stripped away from you. It's gone from one day to the next. And I can tell you, because I've been fired, I know exactly what that feels like. And if you've been out there and if you've been fired, you know that, there's no more job security out there. And so if you only have another support function to that, which is, you have some money saved away, or you have your health, right? Because that's a pillar as well. Then you're on a really shaky foundation. And so what I find when I interview successful people, especially those that are like happier and more well-balanced, is they have a broader definition of success. When I interviewed Barbara Martine Coppola, who was the former CEO of Decathlon, an $18 billion company based in Europe. She's a board member of the INSEAD Business School, former chief marketing officer at YouTube, a very successful woman in terms of society's definition of success, right? Money, status, prestige, etc., accomplishments. But she also, seemed to be very well balanced in terms of her marriage, her kids, her health, etc. And if you look at the podcast, we talk about her definition of success, and there is a strong desire to want to give back. There is a strong desire to be part of organizations that are driven by purpose. There is a strong need to be with her family, right? To have dinner with her kids. And therefore she had a much more balanced definition of success. And so I think one of the things that we need to reconsider as a society is we need to think of like what success really looks like and how to be more balanced in our approach. When I find people that, they are spiritual or religious, they have a good relationship with their kids. They spend time in the gym, they're healthy, they eat well, they sleep well. They have an interesting job, right? They have friends, they spend time with others, they give back to their community. What I'm saying is that they have multiple pillars, right? Think of going back to the Acropolis, going back to the temple, they have multiple pillars which supports and sustains their life. And so if their job goes to shit, guess what? They have all these other support structures. They have friends, they have family, they have church, they have civil, they have community service, they have fitness. And so the more of those pillars that you work to support and sustain, the less at risk you are when things go very wrong. And they always go very wrong, right? Life is a product of struggle, right? Human beings, we do struggle. That's part of the human condition. That's part of what makes us human beings, right? It's like anybody who's ever tried to do something difficult, you know that you're going to struggle and that shit's not going to go well oftentimes, and you're going to have to deal with it and figure that out. And so I think that's one of the things that I encourage you guys to think about. I want to leave you with a tool, because I believe that, this podcast is just not for some random musings of my, me in some hotel room somewhere. I also want to also leave you guys with tips and tools. One of the tools that I use when I work with clients, as a coach, is called the Wheel of Life. And if you just kind of like look this up on Google or ChatGPT or whatever you use these days, it'll describe the Wheel of Life for you. And it's a very simple tool, which I encourage you guys to use and to revisit once or twice a year, particularly at the end of the year, at the beginning of the year. And the Wheel of Life is kind of like a bicycle wheel, right? And like any bicycle wheels, it's supported by spokes. And the Wheel of Life, typically you have many different spokes. So you have health, you have wealth, you have financial well-being, you have friendships, you have partnerships, you have spiritual well-being, you have community and giving back to the community, right? And so I think if you take a half an hour, take an hour once or twice a year. This is not a big deal. You can do this on a Sunday morning. You can do it on an evening instead of watching Netflix or whatever it is that you're doing, right? Or instead of scrolling social media, which hopefully not many of you people do that, but I understand, that we're all kind of trapped in that loop. But if you look at your life once or twice a year through the lens of the Wheel of Life, and you look at where you are on a scale of 1 to 10, where am I in my relationships? On a scale of 1 to 10, where am I with my friendships? On a scale of 1 to 10, how's my financial health, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, how's my spiritual health? If you are honest with yourself and you assess yourself once or twice a year on those different spokes, and then you take concerted action to improve, you will notice a significantly different level of quality of life for yourself. And you will notice that you are happier and more balanced and less anxious, and that you are less dependent on any given part of your life going to shit. Because let's face it, that is what life is all about. It's all about challenges. We get divorced, we have problems with our kids, we have problems with our health. I had a thing the last 6 weeks where it's like I had sprains everywhere. I had like a shoulder sprain, I had a forearm sprain, I had things in my feet. Guess what? No big deal, right? Compared to people who have cancer, definitely not a big deal. I'm blessed. Touch wood, I always say that I'm very lucky about my health. But it made me realize how important health is when all of a sudden I couldn't do things the way I wanted to. I couldn't work out hard because I had pain, right? There was one day I woke up and I wanted to go for a long walk, and my feet were like so sore and they were hurting so much that I had to ice them, and so I decided from now until the end of the year I'm going to take it a little bit easier. I'm going to do more yoga, I'm going to do more stretching. Health is a vital part of our Wheel of Life. Health is a vital pillar in our temple, right? When you have good health, you can do anything. You can recover from anything. Your wife can leave you or your husband can leave you, and guess what? You can bounce back and you can find somebody else, right? You can have toxic relationships at work. You can leave and fucking find another job and work with other people. But if you lose your health, you're really screwed. And so, for the first time in a long time, I realized as I had these small aches and pains, I was like, wow, on average, I'm really blessed that my health is generally pretty good, right? One of those spokes is not a 10 out of 10, but it's probably an 8 out of 10. And there are a lot of people who don't have that. And so I've got, probably an 8 out of 10 on my health. I've probably got a 7 or 8 out of 10 in my spiritual well-being. I've got, probably an 8 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10 with my kids. I have really, really good relationships with my kids. I have good friendships, although I don't see my friends as much because they're kind of all over the world, right? So I have a lot of friends in the Valley or in London, and so I don't get to see as many of them, and I don't have as many close friends in Miami. So, that's kind of like my final tip, guys, is have a look at the Wheel of Life. Give yourself a half an hour to make an honest assessment of where you are on a scale of 1 to 10 on each one of those categories. And then think of, how do I change this? What do I need to do differently to get a little bit more balance and to strengthen that particular pillar in your temple that is your life? And look, I hope that this was helpful. I hope you didn't find my musings too boring. I hope that you enjoyed the backdrop and the scenery. Try and make other videos from different parts of the world. There will be a video coming up in Chile probably next week. And the week after that's going to be a really cool video. Maybe I'll do it with some lions and shit in the background because I'll be in South Africa. So as I said, this video is all about the messy middle of success. We are all going through our own journeys. Life is not a straight line. Life is not easy. There are struggles. But if you stay focused on that wheel of life, if you work on nurturing your relationships, if you work on being of service to others, you'll find that you are able to get out of your own of your own head and help others, and that makes your life more enjoyable, more meaningful, and hopefully more balanced. So that's it for me from today. I wish you guys all the best from Singapore. The next video will be back home, and with that, we will see you in the next video. See you soon. Bye.